Her favourite place is the riverside, away from the city, away from the cars and the noise of the people. She likes sunsets and dandelions. She takes him to her favourite place, a place she wouldn't take anyone else. She's trying to read the expression on his face, but his eyes are not like vaults. "Do you ever?" he begins to say, but abruptly stops himself. "What?" she asks. She watches him sigh. His lips, she notices. They are the colour of cherries, but the softness of a peach. They look as sweet and as cold as plums. His lips make her think about the poem. "I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox." She asks again, "What?" He says, "Do you ever wonder how light from the sun takes 8 minutes to reach us? And when the sun finally burns out and we only have 8 minutes of light left, do you think we would know?" She's stealing glances at his lips and thinking about the poem. They were in an icebox in the kitchen, and the poet eats them for breakfast even though they weren't his to have. They were cold and fresh and forbidden. She's looking at his lips, a palette of pinks and crimsons but tinged with blue from the cold outside. She wanted to touch those lips, but they weren't hers to have. She thinks of the poet's wife. The plums were hers. Or maybe they were for his son or daughter. Whoever's they were had left a note on the door of the icebox asking the poet not to eat them. Was there even a note? She couldn't remember. "I've eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast." "Do you think we would know that we had those 8 minutes to make the most of the light?" the boy asks again, but quietly this time, as if he wasn't really speaking to her at all. "I don't think we would know," she replies, but with uncertainty. He presses his lips together thoughtfully. She asks, "What happens to us when the light goes?" The boy's eyes search away from her for an answer. "It would be cold," he concludes. "I suppose we would die?" She snorts, "From the cold?" "You know what I mean, not just from the cold." Her mind returns to the icebox. She imagines tendrils of frost creeping curiously at first, and then upon reaching the ripe plums possessively, piercing minute shards through the fruit's silky skin. He says, "I don't think I would want to know that it was the end." She imagines the softness of his full lips against hers. She fears that their taut fullness was susceptible to splitting apart if she pressed too hard, too curiously against them. She was afraid that his cold, silky lips would split open if her hot, rough ones kissed them. That the skin would burst and their sweet insides released as does a ripe plum against desiring teeth. Like how the lips in the poem burst open the forbidden plums. And if hers ever burst his lips apart, she would say with a mouth saturated with his bitter, stolen blood, "Forgive me, they were delicious. So sweet and so cold." However, what she did say to him was, I think that I would want to know if I only had 8 minutes left. I would want to try and make something of it. The fact he has smiled because of her is too much that she can't bear to look, and she thinks she could cry because of it. And so she drags her eyes away from him to admire the sunset across the river ahead. She whispers, sadly, "I wouldn't worry. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere for a while." He exclaims, "I didn't know the sun could be so enormous, so close to us, or that it could be so red. It's so round, like my nail. I can fit the sun behind my nail perfectly." Then they're silent for a while, watching the water lap pink ripples against the riverbank. "Are you glad I got you to leave your house now?" she asks. Her heart beats as if fueled on ecstasy. He doesn't look at her, but he says, "I am." He runs his tongue over his cold, cerise lips before he parts them and says in that effortlessly velvet way of speaking that only he could, "You were right after all. It does look like a plum." And then, in that moment, she wished that those had been her last 8 minutes. But as they walked away from the river, the light from the sun still remained. The air hadn't even got cold.